The Bible is the most influential book ever written. It is actually a collection of 66 individual books, 39 books of the Old Testament and 27 books of the New Testament, studied, loved, hated, banned, and translated into a multitude of different languages. It tells the story of the man from Nazareth, the Christ, the Son of the living God, who came to be worshipped by the early Christians as the resurrected Lord and God incarnate. But can we trust the Bible, more specifically, the New Testament? Does it contain real history, and does it accurately describe who Jesus is, what he said, and what he did? Welcome to our November 2021 meeting of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Our live in-house guest is Dr. Timothy McGrew, professor and chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Western Michigan University. Tim is a practicing Christian and philosopher who specializes in theories of knowledge and the history and philosophy of science. He has contributed to a number of journals, books, and professional publications on a wide range of topics about science, theology, and epistemology. On this episode, Tim examines and responds to our October 2021 guest, Dr. Bart Ehrman, and his claims about the Gospels and New Testament texts. Is Dr. Ehrman correct about the claims he makes regarding the texts of the New Testament? Is the Bible historically trustworthy? What can we really know about what the authors of the New Testament wrote? Tim addresses some of these and other questions during our meeting. We hope you'll be encouraged to explore these questions more deeply for yourself. This was our first in-person meeting since March of 2020. We hope to continue meeting in person in 2022. Here is the co-host and co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, Watchman Fellowship President James Walker.
Welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Hopefully we're live. We are a monthly gathering of believers and skeptics, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. We've had some really good book clubs over the years. We've been doing this now about 5 years now, going on 5 years. My name is James Walker. I'm co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. I am a Christian, and I am also the president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical apologetics Christian ministry focusing primarily on interfaith evangelism. Our other co-founder is Bill Cluck. Bill is a former Christian, now atheist, and we met each other about 5 years ago, became friends. I was, for about a year, I was an honorary member of the Metroplex Atheist. They even gave me a membership card, and so we enjoyed that, and Bill got us set up. I do want to make an announcement before we start the club proper here in just a second. We've had a relationship, our ministry, with the Baptist Convention of New Mexico for probably 6 or 7, 8 years now. And I've been asked to do a workshop at their evangelism conference in Albuquerque. So March 1st, we tried to talk about what topic, should we talk about Jehovah's Witnesses or Islam or what topic, but they wanted to do something on atheism. So I said, rather than just me telling you what atheism is really about, it might be better to have a real atheist come in and let's talk about it. So Bill kindly agreed, and on March 1st, we'll be in Albuquerque at the State Evangelism Conference having a 1-hour dialogue on some facet of Christianity and atheism. We got to work that out, what we're going to talk about. And then take questions from the audience. But this is kind of what we do at the club. We try to have substantive conversations about issues related to spirituality and atheism, and to try to learn from each other. I have had the privilege of hearing some of the best arguments against Christianity. I guess that's a privilege for the last 4 or 5 years, and still I'm a Christian, so maybe I'm stubborn, I don't know what. But one of the things, seriously, as Christians, we want to have outreach to people of other faiths, and we want to be able to develop relationships, be friends. And you can be better friends by talking with somebody than talking about them. And so that's what this book club's all about. Let's get to know each other. Let's be friends. And, maybe we do change our position. So far, we have had no Christians become atheists and no atheists become Christians that I'm aware of. And but that's okay. It's not necessarily about that. It's about developing relationships and learning. I hope it helps me be a better thinker And our special guest today, our guest author, which is I think is the third or fourth time you've been part of the book club. One by Skype earlier. Yeah, one by Skype. Tim McGrew. Tim McGrew is philosophy professor at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, and is a Christian apologist, philosopher, written numerous books, and so welcome to the book club. And did you want anything to share on that as well, Bill?
Well, I enjoyed the debate between you and Bart Ehrman on, what's his name? The British guys.
Justin Brierley,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. So, I actually, when you look at YouTube videos, you see the atheist. When Bart Ehrman comes on, he might as well have come down from Mount Sinai. I mean, it's like they're so obsequious. Like, oh, Bart, is this really true? Oh, Bart, and it's like, yeah, Bart's like the expert. He's the man, okay? But I enjoyed hearing Tim's counter view, and I thought, I did take some of these things, like the closing of the temple we were talking about earlier, on faith, and it's nice to have the other side.
Well, I also wanted to introduce Brady Blevins. Brady Blevins, senior apologist at Watchman Fellowship, and he is working with me to try to get all these moving pieces going on. This is the first time we've ever tried to do Zoom, Switcher Studio, and live at the same time. Very challenging. I don't even know if we're pulling it off. We'll find out later. So bear with us on that. And also Daniel. Daniel is our staff apologist at Watchman Fellowship. And Daniel is also cooked our meal. It was an act of love. How many enjoyed the meatloaf?
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate that, Daniel. So we try to, I like this feature of the book club. You have a meal together for an hour, even though I didn't get to enjoy it this time with all the moving parts. But to have that time and get some fellowship, get some relationships going, stuff like that. So it makes for a good club, I believe. So I think we want to start off by having Dr. McGrew, if he could talk to us a little bit about what got him interested in philosophy and how it relates to the Christian faith. He's the author of one of the recent books that we did in the book club, The Four Views of Christianity and Philosophy. And most of us were part of that book club here a couple of months ago. But just bring us up to speed. Tell us a little bit about that.
Ready, sound check, are we good?
I think so.
You think so? Again, we may find out later. So I was raised by wonderful Christian parents and had really nothing to complain of from the upbringing I received. There were no horrific stories. I know people sometimes have these terrible things that happen to them, and I have great compassion for anybody who's been through that from any perspective, but there is something that's particularly sinister about it when it occurs in the context of a religion. I had none of that. I have nothing to say except loving things about my parents. They were wonderful people, and yet, like most young people around my senior year of high school, first year of college, I started to have questions about what I had been raised in, what I had been taught. I wanted to know, is this true? And there was a library nearby because my father was a theology and Greek professor at the Bible College, which was half a mile up the road, so I could just go up and have the run of the library, and I started reading a lot of things. I read George Smith's book, Atheism, the Case Against God. I read the Atheist Debater's Handbook. I read one of Gary Habermas's early debates with Antony Flew. I read the work of John Warwick Montgomery and of Cornelius Van Til. I will say for the record, and I know this isn't the experience of everybody, but the closest that I came to losing my faith wasn't very close, but it was after reading Van Til. And I just said, if this is all we've got, we're in trouble. Fortunately, there was other stuff. So at the same time, I became interested in skeptical arguments, not just about religion, but about science. And I wanted to know, where do these ultimately go? Can we answer skeptical arguments all the way down to the ground? Well, it turned out to do that, you had to do philosophy. So after doing a couple of years at the Bible College, I packed up and went over to the local Jesuit university to study philosophy. As I was on my way out, one of the people at the Bible College said to me, "You're going to study philosophy? You could get really messed up." thanks for the vote of confidence. So off I went to the University of Scranton, which was nearby. They took transfer credits, every course that did not have the word Baptist in the title. I guess that's what a school in the Jesuit tradition does, which is fine. And so I graduated from Scranton, went to Nashville to do a doctorate in the theory of knowledge, pursuing questions of skepticism at a very fundamental level. And that set of questions has always been with me. We're not simply talking here about skepticism about the existence of God. We're talking about deeper and more fundamental kinds of skepticism, like skepticism about the existence of other minds or the external world. Really deep stuff. This kind of stuff which, when you find somebody taking it very seriously, makes you want to call the people from the insane asylum and say, we've got a problem case here. So, but you can study such arguments without going into the dark corners, and I did, and I've never regretted that training. I had some wonderful professors at Vanderbilt, none of them Christians, but that was not to the point. The point was learn the arguments as well as you can. So for a number of years, I devoted myself to work in the theory of knowledge and the history and philosophy of science. And then, I guess somewhere around 2000 or so, somebody got in touch with me and said, hey, over here in philosophy of religion land, we're working on some mathematical stuff that comes up in the third volume of Alvin Plantinga's Warrant trilogy. He's got this criticism of Richard Swinburne, and it involves this probability theory stuff. We can kind of follow it a little bit, but we can't do it. Would you have a look? And that really is what brought me back full circle into the apologetics material, and maybe take another look at what was going on with Plantinga's critique. Why is one of the most famous Christian philosophers of the late 20th century criticizing an argument for the historical truth of Christianity? That seemed curious. And I want to say for the record, it's absolutely fine for a Christian to critique arguments given by other Christians. In fact, I think it's healthy and important, just as I think it's healthy and important for atheists sometimes to criticize arguments made by other atheists. Guys, if we don't do this internally, somebody from the other side is going to. I've got to tell you, if you don't have Bill here telling you mythicism, come on, guys, then I will tell it to you. You should take it from Bill. So that's fine, but I didn't think Plantinga's argument worked. And so I published on that, and that kicked off my re-entry into this, and eventually led to my doing more lectures on this topic, writing some things, and at my wife's insistence, put it up on YouTube, and then that actually kind of took off, that was fun. Anyway, that brings us roughly up into the point where I connected with you guys. I have more to say about what I wrote here, but I don't know if you want me to do that or not. So.
Oh, yeah. That does help kind of put it in. He's on our board of directors at Watchman. He's a longtime friend and professor there. We've been going 20 years now, 25 years, a long time. Anyway, so that's where we met, and you've very interesting talks that you were giving at that. And so in the book club and also our podcast, Apologetics Profile, we've had you on that as well as a guest on that. So tell us about the first book club we brought you into. We were looking at Bart Ehrman's book, Jesus Interrupted. And yes, that one. And and so we couldn't get Bart on at that time, but we had somebody who had seen Bart, somebody who had actually debated him on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable podcast, and that was pretty interesting as well. So that was our first kind of connection with you on that. Then what happened was we actually did get Bart. In our last book club, we had Bart Ehrman, and he was talking about his book, Misquoting Jesus. Mm-hmm. I think that's his best ever seller, but he is a New York Times bestseller. And so we had him on, and something had come up, actually in the original book club we had you on, but also in the book, the Four Views book, you talked about the New Testament reliability and textual variance, and an issue came up with the numbering of the miracles in John's Gospel. And so it's come up really, this will be the third time in the book club. So maybe we can hopefully get further clarification on it. I've got a video I'd like to share from last month. And Ken Daniels, who's with us, where's Ken? Yeah, Ken is with us right now. He asked the question of Bart, for some clarification. And I told him we were going to ask you this month, and that you were going to be our guest, but I'm going to give Bart a chance to come back as well, and to clarify or anything. So, are we ready for that video? Hopefully this will sync, and hopefully we'll get audio.
Hey, this is a real treat. I appreciate you being here. And I am the one that was mentioned earlier, a missionary who left the faith along the way. Okay. I met you at a debate with Justin Bass a few years ago.
Right.
Got to greet you there. So, but the question I have is based on a book that we read recently for the book club, and it's called let's see, 4 Views. Let's see the title of it here. 4 Views on Christianity and Philosophy, and one of the contributors was Tim McGrew. And I know that there's no love lost between you and Tim McGrew. I heard a debate that you had, kind of a knockdown, drag-out debate between you and him on the Unbelievable podcast with Justin Brierley a few years ago. But he makes a charge in this book that I thought was pretty direct and inflammatory. And I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to it. And so I'm going to read it a little bit at length if I could. And he says, the common counter-argument is that the Gospels contradict one another, not just here or there, but so extensively that they cannot be taken as reliable records. A good illustration of the popular view of the matter can be found in the 2nd chapter of Bart Ehrman's book, Jesus Interrupted, which proposes to introduce Ehrman's readers to a world of contradictions, in quotes. His counteractive examples viewed at a distance looks impressive, but most of them will not survive even a moderately close investigation. I'm not speaking here of desperate attempts to harmonize every small detail by far-fetched conjectures. I'm talking about the basic charity and reading that we would accord to the documents of secular history, the sort of honesty and quotation that would prevent us, were the subject matter not the Christian scriptures, from omitting inconvenient words when giving quotations in order to manufacture an appearance of contradiction, an appearance that would be destroyed by a quotation of the immediate context. This is a harsh criticism, and though there is no space here to give a detailed account of dozens of examples, I should offer at least 1 or 2 clear instances of this sort of chicanery. Here is one of Ehrman's examples in his own words. And then he goes on to quote you. In John's Gospel, Jesus performs his first miracle in chapter 2 when he turns the water into wine, a favorite miracle story on college campuses. And we're told that this was the first sign that Jesus did. Later in that chapter, we're told that Jesus did many signs in Jerusalem. And then in chapter 3 or 4, he heals the son of a centurion, and the author says, this was the second sign that Jesus did. One sign, many signs, and then the second sign. So then McGrew goes on and says, what happens if we look up these verses for ourselves? Continuing John 2:11, a few words beyond the point where Ehrman adroitly cuts it off, we read, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs. And when we continue John 4:54 in the same way, we read, this was the second sign that Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. And then he says, the many signs mentioned in John 2:23 were, as Ehrman himself admits, worked in Jerusalem, which is not in Galilee. It is perfectly obvious that John is applying the ordinal numbers to the miracles in Galilee, a consideration that makes the contradiction, in quotes, evaporate. It is equally obvious that Ehrman has deliberately crafted his presentation of the alleged problem to avoid giving his readers this information. So I'll stop there. But he goes on.
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, good. I don't know him, so I don't have any feelings about him. I just we had that debate, and he had some rather unusual arguments. I thought. So in this particular case, he's referring to. Let me just say, Ken, this isn't something I came up with. This is stuff that people in seminary hear all the time about the Gospel of John. This is like standard stuff. He turns the water to wine and says, this is the first sign. Goes to Jerusalem and says he does many signs. Comes back, heals the centurion, heals this guy's son, and says this is the second sign. And then what he's pointing out is that it goes on to say, having come from Jerusalem to Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think he's reading the Greek correctly. What the Greek is saying, in my judgment, is this is the second sign that Jesus did, and he did this one after he came from Galilee from Jerusalem to Galilee. He does not say this is the second sign in Galilee.
So you think McGrew is the one who is misinterpreting the text?
Yeah.
I just thought it was. I mean, I read it and I was taken aback, and I thought there must be some explanation because I don't think Ehrman would be that.
Well, I mean, it just
but
it's easy. It's easy to set up a straw man and then knock it down.
right.
But yeah, and again, this isn't like something I came up with. This is like very standard. This is the whole basis for throughout the 20th century, since the 1950s. Johannine scholars have. There used to be a consensus that the Gospel of John was based on a source that scholars have called the signs source.
Mm-hmm.
John has 7 signs, and in the Gospel of John there's 7 signs, and the idea is that there was a source that's floating around that John has incorporated into his Gospel, that it was just listing the 7 signs of Jesus, 7 miracles he did that convinced people to believe. That ended with what's now John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. And one piece of evidence of that has always been, I mean, for the last 70 years, that he does the first sign, does many signs in the second sign. And so, of course, scholars, they do know what the verse says in chapter 4. And so it is that we're making things up.
I just think it's a little bit ironic that McGrew talks about charity and reading charitably, but yet he's not willing to read you charitably on that point.
No, well, he has no reason to, yeah.
All right. Well, one does have to admire the dexterity with which Ehrman forces a card. Did you notice what happened there? Where in anything that I said did I claim that the subordinate clause in John 4:54 says that this was the second sign in Galilee? I didn't. In fact, in the footnote at the bottom of page 145, I say, in a note buried at the back of the book, Ehrman argues that the Greek of John 4:54 probably should not be translated as saying that this was the second miracle Jesus worked in Galilee. But this claim, right or wrong, is irrelevant. The meaning does not need to be secured by an explicit construction in the Greek of that verse. It is already obvious from the double reference to Galilee in John 2:11 and John 4:54. Now, Ehrman, secure in his ability to do a little bit of Greek bullying, immediately moves to, well, I think he's misreading the Greek because he's saying this. That wasn't what I was saying. But he manages to force that card very dexterously, and I'll wager many of you didn't watch and see closely enough to see what he was doing. It's not a matter of the subordinate clause in John 4:54. It's a matter of the fact that John bothers to mention this in Galilee when he's using the ordinal numbers. So 3 questions. First, does the grammar of John 4:54 rule out the possibility that John is counting the miracles, the signs, done in Galilee specifically? No, it does not rule that out anymore. Second question, why does John include the reference to Galilee in those places specifically? I maintain it's because he is counting those specifically for his own purposes. Third question, why does Bart omit the references to Galilee on page 8 in Jesus Interrupted when he's presenting it so that you don't see the reference to Galilee in either case? And that is why I accused him of chicanery. I'm prepared, if you want me to go into a number of other illustrations from the same chapter in the same book and give you more evidence on this front. But I want to say to you, everyone's case seems good as long as you're listening only to one person. And that's why I'm glad that you went and you asked Bart about this, so you could hear his answer in his words, which is also the answer he gives in here on page 285 in the footnote, and then gave me a chance to respond. And I'm glad you're going to go back to him and say, hey, Bart, what do you have to say to that? This is not, things are not all as they seem. There are few people I've encountered who are as adroit at rhetoric as Bart. You see the high school, college level Lincoln Douglas debater coming out here. He was a debate champion, and you can see why. He moves really fast and he's really plausible. But that is my take on what's going on. Ken, would you like a chance to respond?
So I'll just put on a disclaimer that this particular alleged discrepancy was never one that arose to the level of something I was ever concerned about or interested in even really. It just came up in the book, and I thought, okay, well, let me throw that out to Bert and see what he says. Yeah. But I am interested now, and I haven't really followed up much on it either. I'm curious about it. It's piqued my curiosity. But so there's allegedly 7 signs. Some people say 6. Some people say 8. I don't know.
Yes.
How many of them were actually numbered? Was this?
I don't think he keeps on going with the ordinal numbers all the way through, and that is part of what makes it so difficult for people to figure it out. Bart just says there are 7 signs, but if you go and you start counting them yourself, you find what to count as a sign gets a little dodgy, and you can come up with 6 or 8 depending on the assumptions you bring to it. This is one of the things that worries me about New Testament scholarship, and particularly Johannine scholarship. Those of you on the atheist side are accustomed to accusing the Christians of a bit of pareidolia sometimes, right? You're seeing patterns, you're seeing the Virgin Mary in a pancake or something like that. Come on, guys. It's easy to see patterns that aren't really there, right? And I would say you're right. But it's also easy to see patterns in ancient texts that we're importing to them that force us to do a little dodging around. If you count up all of the sea creatures, including some mollusks, named in one of the old bestiaries, you will come up with a number that's almost the 153 of the number of fish caught in John 21. It's like, well, we can get up to like 152, which is really close, so John must have been referring to that. I'm sorry, this is being forced, right? And so I think that there is a tendency on the part of New Testament scholars, and this not just extremely skeptical ones, but also some who would call themselves evangelicals, to try really, really hard to say that they found the secret decoder ring that enables them to tell what was going on in a particular passage, when really, we just don't know. We just don't know what was going on there. And so this is a call for humility, I think, a little bit as we're reading these ancient texts.
Well, I recall that in the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus that John did number those, and they occurred in different places geographically. So he said what number they were and where they happened. So I did try to find, just while I was looking through my phone just now, I was trying to find were the other signs numbered as well, but I couldn't.
I don't
find
think they are.
Numbers.
Right. So you can just search for the ordinals and see what comes up.
I was just trying to establish, well, what is John's pattern here? Does he have a pattern?
Right. So I just came from a session at the Evangelical Theological Society where my wife gave a talk, and it was on the evidence of unexplained allusions in the Gospel of John. And I guess the fundamental lesson is I don't really think there is a pattern with a capital P. In fact, if you look at instances of contemporary reportage, you look at Jimmy Fortune's interview with Michael Booth, where Jimmy Fortune is talking about the story of his coming to sing with the Statler brothers. He ends up mentioning details in passing that don't connect in any way to the rest of the story, because that's how human memory works. And you get things like this in the Gospel of John as well. There are just these things dropped in, and then the narrative flows on. There's nothing else done with it. And that's very much what we see when people are recounting things in memory. They don't pause to explain all these things. Contrast that with what you have in ancient literature. So take Homer's Odyssey, right? There's a wonderful book by Eric Auerbach called Mimesis. And in the first chapter, Odysseus' Scar, he talks about the scene where Odysseus returns from his travels. His wife is there, Penelope is there. She's beset with suitors. She says, oh, I'll choose a suitor when I finish my tapestry. And then at night she comes and unravels part of it, and so she's never quite done. Odysseus returns home, and he realizes it's not going to go well if he just says, hey guys, I'm here, you can all leave now. So he comes as sort of a, just someone who is seeking a night's lodging at the house. An old servant of the house who's been there for many decades comes to him. She offers to wash his feet. She's pulling up his garments above the knee so she can wash his feet, and she sees a scar on his leg. And she recognizes him. Immediate pause, backflash, And he has to tell you the whole story of how the young Odysseus, when he was a boy, went on a boar hunt, but there was an accident and he was injured and she's the one who treated him. He's got to fill in the backstory. Why? Because he's writing a work of fiction. There is no external world that just provides that backdrop that he can just take for granted his readers are going to know or not know, but that's the way it happened. He's got to fill you in on why it is she recognizes him. Auerbach specifically contrasts this with narrative from life. And he says, look, this is what ancient fiction is like. There are not these unexplained things dropped in. They don't leave the ends dangling loose like that. They tie them up. It's really a fascinating discussion. When you read the Gospel of John, and all that it takes is a copy of it and a pencil, unless you're reading it on your cell phone, and then I can't help you. You have your own marking up features. You will find a lot of things like that just, they're little bits of the narrative, they pass, nothing further is made of them. You can actually find them in all the Gospels, in Mark's Gospel, right? Jesus is asleep in the boat on a pillow. What's the theological significance of the pillow? There isn't any! Peter remembered that there was a pillow, and that's all there is to it, and Mark wrote it down, and there's nothing further going on. It's just a little detail, he remembered it. The randomness of what will be psychologically salient to someone is one of the pervasive features of human testimony. You can't tell what somebody else is going to come away having remarked. You just can't tell. One person sees one thing, one person sees one thing, one person sees another. That's why we get varying reports from people. Go ahead, Bill.
So, speaking of Jesus on the pillow, walking on water, for instance, okay? This, in one gospel, I think Mark, it's just Jesus walking on the water. We get to Matthew, and Peter's walking on the water. Remember, he, takes his eyes off
He takes a dive, yeah.
A million sermons have been taught. So this is the first human walking on water. This is no small detail. How do you explain that? And we want, what we're trying to find out, Christian or atheist, did Jesus walk on water? Is this miracle? So all we have to go by is what's in Mark, Jesus walking on the water, or is it Matthew, Jesus and Peter walking on the water? Does that not undermine the credibility of the gospel storytellers?
So I have a whole bunch of illustrations from secular history to help us calibrate before we answer that question. And I'm happy to go into those. But once we have, I think the question will take on a certain more interesting aspect. I don't think that you can say, hey, Mark omits something Matthew includes, therefore there's some kind of vast tension. Even in reports in purely secular history, so I'm going to just stay away from the Bible and talk about the death of Julius Caesar, or the death of the Emperor Caracalla, or the Gettysburg Address, or Calvin Coolidge's announcement in 1927 that he didn't choose to stand for re-election. And in the newspaper reports of these things, or in the ancient Roman sources, we find more variation than you find among gospel accounts like these. And once you see that, I think if you're honest, it will make you recalibrate just how much uniformity you're expecting. After all, Bill, if Matthew and Mark told the same story with the same details, in the same order, in much the same words, what would you say? Right? Wouldn't you say, oh, yeah, well, Matthew's just getting it from Mark, right?
I agree. It adds to the credibility that their stories don't just line up, because then you suspect collusion.
Exactly.
But it gets worse. This book you're familiar with. The
Launch it. Go for it.
The scholars gave things, pink, Jesus might have said it, red, he definitely said, black, he didn't say it. The whole Gospel of John, if you look in this book, is black. Jesus, those long drawn out things like I am the vine, you are the branches, these long discourses are totally at odds with Mark's aphorisms, short, pithy statements, saying, give unto Caesar what is Caesar. He doesn't go into these long courses. Sure, and my man, Dale Allison, has said that we can't trust all of what Jesus said. We've got to go and tease out. You know how they do, that some things go back to Jesus, some things don't.
Right.
Wouldn't you agree that these long discourses do not go back to Jesus?
Okay, so there's multiple questions here, and I'm going to take them up one at a time. Number one, Matthew's got more long, uninterrupted discourses than John does. He's got the longest one. He's got more of them than John does. That's just a canard. Point number two, Matthew's got a whole bunch of pithy sayings. It's just not true. John has a whole bunch of pithy sayings. It's not true that the synoptics have this massive monopoly on them. I can point you to a source that actually collects a whole bunch of them in a row. That's just a canard. That's not true. Point number 3, the consensus of scholars is worth nothing more to me than the quality of their arguments. And I find the quality of the arguments of the Jesus Seminar to be severely lacking. 4th point, a book that's just come out this year called The Eye of the Beholder by Lydia McGrew, to whom I happen to be related, is specifically on the historicity of the Gospel of John and deals with a whole bunch of things like this, including the fantasy that John's just full of these long discourses and John doesn't have pithy statements and things like that. So I would direct you to that if you want a detailed argument in favor of the idea that John is historical reportage, habitually truthful, pretty close up to the facts. Then there are almost 500 pages of that awaiting you in The Eye of the Beholder. I don't say this just to sell product, so if you like, a little bit later, Alan Hainline will be joining us, and you can get the book for $15, or it's available for $9.99 on Kindle right now. So you can pick it up either way, not try to make a premium off of this, but it is, I think there's just a lot of misdirection and bad scholarship that's accumulated, and I am not impressed with the opinions of scholars who can't back up what they're saying by arguments that seem to me to be good arguments.
Let me just say, we've talked about this a little bit, Bill. One of our former atheist guests, Robert Price, okay, he is was a fellow of the Jesus Seminar. He was voting, black bead, red bead, did Jesus really say this? Without disclosing he's a mythicist. He doesn't believe Jesus ever existed. I said, why show up to the meeting? It's all black. But it acts like, oh, he's really thought about this, and all this scholarship, the New Testament scholarship has gone into play. He doesn't believe Jesus ever existed. How did he say anything? And
would be like my saying, what did Luke Skywalker really do? None of it.
Yeah, but John Dominic Crossan, who's, you would agree, is a total reliable scholar, he says that it's only like 23%. You know,
I'm sorry. We have very different views on the reliability of John Dominic Crossan. Okay, very different views.
Just common sense. Mark, you've heard of the Messianic secret. Don't tell anybody who I'm. And then in John, all he does is talk about himself and say these I am statements. There's just no way you can get these things, you know.
Do you know who he says he is? These are claims to deity, not to messiahship. Is this the Messiah? They're still asking this. Oh, when the Messiah comes, will we do more works than these? They're still asking these things in John. John is very big on Jesus as the Logos, right? You get that wonderful prologue. But after that, as he's telling you what questions the people are asking about Jesus, nobody ever says, is he the divine Son of God? Nobody ever asks that. They're like, is this Messiah? No, nobody knows where Messiah is coming from a little bit later. Well, but we know he's not the Messiah because he's from Galilee, but the Messiah is going to come from Bethlehem. No, it's all about Messiahship. It's not about John's theological preoccupations. It's about the people's question about Messiahship, and that's as much a live question for that Jewish audience as it is anywhere. So I just think that there has been a lot of false advertising about what goes on in the Gospels, and I would like to encourage atheists and Christians, and many Christians need this absolutely, to go back and read the things. Just read them. Drop the annotated Bible and just pick up a copy of the Gospel and read it. Go back and read the annotations later if you like, but read it for yourself once through and ask yourself, what are the people really chattering about through John? What are they asking about? Because time and time again, is this the Messiah?
Well, the bottom line, like Dale Allison, who is a Christian, by the way, says,
I dispute that.
Okay.
I don't believe he is.
Anyway, he says that you cannot get back to the real Jesus because it's like looking through a stained glass mirror. You have so much Christian interpretation, Christian legend, that you will never get back to the real Jesus, although he thinks we can get back to some core sayings. So what do you believe we can get back to with what Jesus said? Can we get back to some things he said or a lot of things? What would you say?
I think we can get back to the point where we can recognize in all four of the Gospels recognizable paraphrase of things Jesus actually said, in the sense that had you been there and spoken Greek or Aramaic, whatever it was he was speaking at the time, you would have been able to say, this is the bit where he says, I am the true vine. This is the bit where he's healing the guy at the pool of Bethesda, or the pool of Siloam. You would have been able to identify those things. And although word for word tape recorder precision is a straw man, the category of paraphrase is not infinitely malleable. And I believe that you would have found in case after case after case that you could identify by cross-checking it with the Gospels as we have, things that are reported there. They would have been identifiable. I think we're getting back to the historical Jesus. I'm a believer in the historical Jesus of the Gospels, not the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith.
Right.
I don't think there's a separation between the two.
No. Bill sometimes complains that he thinks that we're too nice in the book club, and we never actually argue about anything. Although we've had a couple of book clubs where there's been some fireworks, but yeah, I mean, we try to be.
It's all good.
Yeah, but this one issue with the Bart Ehrman and all has been the closest we've ever come to a controversial, dramatic kind of thing. So I think it is worth bringing up and dealing with it. I'm with Ken. I don't think that if that was a contradiction, I don't think that would bother me very much. But what is of concern is a scholar purposely putting the ellipses there to draw attention away from.
Actually manages to do it without ellipses, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that a purposeful thing, or are you by accident or on purpose mistranslating the Greek yourself? That is a great question, and it's the closest we come to having a little bit of drama in the room on this kind of thing. I do want to come back later, though. You said that there were some other examples. I don't want to belabor it, but maybe if we could get later at least one other example of something that you would feel falls in that category.
Sure, I'd give you several. Yeah.
But I wanted to see two things. First of all, do we have anybody online that's asking a question?
We have a lot of commentary and statements. Let me see. First of all, Susan Lambo.
Hi, Susan.
Says hi to Cody and Tim. And then Phil. This is going back to Matthew. Phil says that, and this isn't a question, it's just a statement. The pattern of interjecting the backstory is what we see in Matthew when he relates the angel rolling away the stone during the narrative about the women arriving at the tomb. Then Phil also says
Phil Bear?
Phil Bear.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just reading the comments from our Zoom friends. The long discourses are not at odds with the synoptics. They are complementary. The fact that they are long discourses does not mean they don't go back to Jesus. It simply doesn't follow. Again, that's from Phil. We have a couple of comments about the delay, but we're working on that. John Henke has a question.
Hi, John.
Tim says hello. Was Robert Price, a mythicist when he was voting on Jesus' sayings at the Jesus seminar? I was under the impression that he turned to mythicism a bit later. That's from...
I was not the one who was privy to that, so James?
That is a good question, John. He was part of the Jesus seminar until fairly recently. I was also surprised that the reason he quit is he was upset because he's a Trump fan and his fellow Jesus seminar scholars were not, and it was a political issue that they came. That's why he dropped out. He would still be a fellow of the Jesus seminar if it wasn't for Donald Trump. So one more thing to blame on our former president. But anyway,
no comment.
So I'm pretty certain, not positive. I'll need to check with Robert on this, but I'm pretty certain that he was, at least for part of the time he was a Jesus seminar scholar, that he was also a mythicist. But it could have been something that happened. It could be part of that time that he definitely was, because the book we talked about first of Robert Price was his first book that he wrote called Beyond Born Again, where he was still calling himself a Christian at that point, who was beyond. So the sequel needs to be way beyond born again Christian, because to be a mythicist is to go. That's a long way from where he was.
And then the next one is the incredible shrinking born againness of Robert Price, right?
Yes, but that was a good question, John, and worth following up.
So he decided Jesus was fake news after all.
One more question from the Zoom from Phil. He says, it's a question. He says, what are they comparing the Gospels to when they conclude they don't depict the real Jesus?
Reality. I mean,
that's Phil's question, so I guess it's.
I mean, this is for somebody else to answer. I mean, I can say something, but I'm a Christian who thinks the Gospels are quite reliable, and I don't think that my word on what people who don't think that believe is really what's being looked for. Bill, can I just hand you the mic and let you go ahead? Take it.
Absolutely. Dale Allison, okay, he's not a Christian, but he's ostensibly whatever you want to say. What I admire about Dale is he says, and I, hate to do something that all the atheists do, the zombies coming out of the tombs in Matthew, but what I like about him is he says, this didn't happen. When he talks about in his epilogue, he says, Jesus was wrong when he predicted that you won't see the man coming to the end, that he got the timeline wrong. This is not just inconsistencies or contradictions. This is very serious. So would you go along with Dale Allison and say, this never happened, the zombies?
Okay. Number one, you know, of course, as well as I do, that the standard Christian position is that these were not brain-eating, shambling, walking dead people. So the zombies term is inappropriate.
Oh, I know that. Yeah.
And the second claim is no. Of course, I wouldn't go along with Dale Allison.
Really?
I don't find that compelling at all.
Because even William Lane Craig and the big guys say this is Michael Kona, apocalyptic imagery. Don't take it seriously.
You are perhaps not aware that about 1,000 pages of recent scholarship that my wife has been doing and public talks I've been giving and she's been giving is centered around the fact that we think Mike Licona is disastrously wrong.
I've watched the videos today.
Wrong in his reading of Elias Theon, wrong in his reading of Plutarch, wrong in his reading of Lucian, and wrong in his reading of the Gospels.
Right.
It's just, we are so not there. And I'm sorry to say that I do think Bill Craig is in some respects following Mike's lead there without having done a serious bit of looking at it himself, and that's a disappointment to me. My William Lane Craig action figure is losing a little bit of its gloss right now.
Well, along those lines, we are not going to have a book club in December with everything going on with the holidays and things, but we want to get back on in January. It may not be the first Thursday. It may or may not be the first Friday. We got to work on the date because most of us are going to be in New Orleans that week. But I put a call and an email out to Dale Allison, and we would like him to be our guest author. So those of you on the side of the believers can be praying along those lines. The atheists, cross your fingers, whatever you do to help.
Well, he's a Christian schizophrenic, so either way, you're going to be okay.
Well, that's one thing we can ask him.
He says it himself. He says, I have four personalities. I have the faith side, but I got the historical, critical, skeptic side.
Does it help to drop the fact that we had Ehrman on last time?
I did. I don't know if it helps or hurts, but I did do that. So I gave some of the atheists and Christians, and seriously, some of you may not recognize the names if you're kind of new to this whole field. These are people that are world-recognized names that have been in our book club. And so I never would have thought we could get that for our tiny little itty-bitty fledgling book club.
It's amazing. I mean, just the fact that I fell into this group just by chance.
Well, again, you accidentally came in, but you have given some great suggestions on who to go after author-wise.
Yeah, when we have the closed door meetings where the atheists don't hear, we always say, what would Ken think of that?
What would Ken do? What would Ken do? The bracelets. What would Ken do? WWKD.
Tim, a question that I don't think it came up last month when we talked to him, but I apologize if it didn't. I edited the video and watched it 3 times, so I don't know. But Bart brings up the argument, and I've seen this before, about there being that Luke doesn't go into. It's an argument from silence. But there's nothing in Luke about Jesus' vicarious atonement. That Luke is silent on the atonement because it's not as explicit in Luke as it is in Paul or whatever. But he makes that argument that there's nothing in. So there's basically there's no atonement in Luke. So Luke and Paul are contrary to one another. I think it's in misquoting Jesus. I read it on his blog recently anyway, so if it's not, but that I mean,
Okay, I mean, do you want me to do the rant on arguments from silence?
Well, I know the logical fallacy that it is, but I just thought you could address that.
Like, of course, Luke has some interests and not others, and Luke's interests are more historical than theological. So you would expect that if there's going to be a point that Luke has less detail on, that would be it. On the other hand, if you, again, and let me just encourage you, pick up your own copy of the Bible and do this with a pencil. Don't just take my word for it. If you read the Gospel of Luke, look at some of the accounts that are paralleled in the other synoptics of healing miracles, right? Oh, Jesus heals a man with a withered hand. Only in Luke do you find it's his right hand. Jesus heals a leper, but Luke tells you not just that the guy had leprosy, but that his whole body was full of leprosy. Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law of a fever. Luke tells you with a medically specific term that it's a great fever. This is a guy who's got a thing for medical details. Look at the detailed discussion of what was wrong with Paul after his cataclysmic encounter on the road to Damascus. He's all about, oh, there fell as it were scales from his eyes. Who is Luke? Right? Luke is the beloved physician. This is an illustration all the more valuable because Luke never in his gospel makes any claims about his own status as a physician, but you see that he's really, really interested in these little details. They come up in Luke and they come up in Acts. Little things like that, learning to read in ways where we do see some patterns of that kind emerging. That is more valuable than any direct attestation. I study these things carefully. Luke can say that in the first 4 verses. We can read the gospel and we might come away with a very different impression. Right? We read the Res Augusta in Roman history and we say, you know what? This guy's just making up a bunch of stuff. and so in secular history, sometimes we make these negative judgments about people. But it's really curious that you can see some patterns of that kind showing up in the books traditionally ascribed to Luke, and certainly authored by the same person, whether he was Luke or somebody else. I don't think Ken would want to dispute that Luke and Acts were written by the same hand.
You make a good point about argument from silence, and I'm with you to the extent that on your side you would be willing to not use the argument from silence to establish that, say, the book of Acts was written before the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, simply because there's no mention of it.
That argument by itself, I think, would be a weak argument. It might have a little bit of force. I don't think one should lean on it. I'm more impressed with the argument that Adolf Harnack develops in his book, The Dating of Acts and the Synoptic Gospels, where he goes back through the book of Acts and looks for multiple other clues in the Greek constructions and lays out a multi-layered argument for the early dating. He references the destruction of Jerusalem, but that is not the point on which he places the most stress. Harnack, of course, is a complete anti-miraculous guy. He thinks that the resurrection and the virgin birth are, as he calls them, the primitive myths of Christianity. But he's so impressed by the chain of arguments that have led him to redate the book of Acts, that he's actually changed his mind from things he had published earlier on that. So I find Harnack's multi-layered argument to be persuasive, but I'm in agreement with you. The mere omission of that is by itself of very little weight. There are lots of omissions.
You would agree that it's a fairly prominent argument put forward by most apologists.
The older I get, the more I am moved to say I am not responsible for all of the things that Christian apologists say.
But you're right, Ken. It is commonly appealed to. Would you say it's also a similar argument from silence, but the fact that the star Paul is still the book ends with him still in Rome waiting to go to trial, and that chapter is never closed out? Does that seem like, barring that there's not a long ending of Acts somewhere that we haven't found, it seems like it ends up, we're waiting for season 2. It leaves us hanging.
It does leave us hanging a bit, and that's interesting because Luke is not shy in Acts about talking about people making pronouncements and then the fulfillment of those pronouncements. So you'll remember the prophet Agabus saying that there's going to be a great dearth, and then, he says this occurred during the reign of the Emperor Claudius, right? He just stops in, I think it's Acts 11, and just drops that little bit in. He's like, hey, look forward to that, and that happened. And we don't get that in Luke. We don't get that in Acts, so we don't get it in any of the Olivet Discourse fragments that we have scattered through Luke or anything like that. We just don't have that. Was Luke intending to write a third book? Maybe. I don't know. It's possible. Acts is long enough. He might have been coming to the end of his scroll. Josephus, at one point in the Jewish War, says that he's running out of scroll, and he'll say more later. And then, he picks it up, and we get another book in the Jewish War. So that does happen sometimes to people. They're just running out of space, and they stop.
How you date Acts changes all the dating, because if Acts is early, then Luke must be earlier.
And if Luke used Mark, then
yeah.
Mark's got to be earlier still. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I would not simply say that the failure to discuss the destruction of Jerusalem is by itself an argument of great weight. So, I actually want to agree with you on that point. I think that's fair. That's a fair tag.
Well, we're going to take another question before we take our break.
All right, so I want to push back just a little bit on that. Not because I'm for arguments of silence, I recognize the weakness of that. But if you start to look at the constant tension between Christians and classical Jews during that period, and you start to look at what's happening with Claudius and the Jews that are constantly bickering about this guy Christus, people getting kicked out of Rome, people about to get kicked out of Alexandria. I think it says something pretty powerful when the Jews put forth an argument about the gospel that seems to have great force against the argument from the legalism of the Jews at that time and the temple and all of that, that they say nothing theologically. If this was written around 70 or 71, you would think they would say, see guys, we told you this was coming. Had you listened to us, you'd probably still have your temple. Something along those lines. You would expect, I would think, given all that tension between these two groups, to see some sort of theological statement made about the destruction of the temple. And so, yes, it's not an ironclad argument, but I mean, if you're just looking at history, that's really odd.
Yeah, I made the parallel before in the book club about if you're reading a book about terrorism in America,
right?
And it mentions the first attack of the trades on the World Trade Center, but fails to mention the second one. That is also an argument from silence, but it seems to be more substantive. That how could you not mention the second one, which was so much greater than the first?
Or if you leave out, the Twin Towers completely. When you're reading a history of New York, you would tend to think that this is something that was written prior to the attack on the towers. How much more when we're talking about the very center of their political system and their theological system in a country that's the size of Rhode Island. This was a big deal. For them not to make some sort of theological comment about it.
Now the liberal argument is that the Gospels were written way after, and so rather than acknowledging it, they just manufactured a prophecy for Jesus where they backdate the prophecy to make Jesus say it before it happens, but they knew it was going to happen because it had already happened in their lives.
Well, yeah, and then to go along with that, if they were to talk about it as something that happened in the past, then that would be showing their hand that they were cheating, by inserting that ahead of time.
Yeah.
So if you want to play the con, you got to play the con all the way through.
Yeah, right? And it really shows me on the how that biases that we bring into the discussion. How every fact fits your narrative. Mm-hmm. You make it fit your narrative. That's one of the things I got out of the book club. You don't realize how much you have the biases makes it fit. The whole debate about whether or not it's good to get a vaccine or something like that. So I have a heart condition, so I better not get the vaccine. And the other person says I have the same heart condition, which is why I must get the vaccine. So it's just like, well, that's the same facts, but it plays into the biases, and so we can't do away with that. I think everybody agrees on both sides. We can't eliminate it, but we can at least be aware that we have those biases.
But
and try to
the broad senses of scholarship, I've read this 100 times. And by the way, Bart Ehrman writes the textbooks used throughout the country in the universities. All of them say just about Mark 65 to 70. Matthew and Luke about 85, John 90. This is a broad consensus. You'd agree with that, right?
Well, why? What are the arguments that...
This is just scholarly consensus that everybody knows. Am I not right?
It is consensus. Of course, the word no is a success verb. So I'm going to come along and say something about that. Do you have a copy of Bart's textbook, The New Testament?
I gave it away to a professor and I never got it back.
I'm sorry
It
about
really
that.
hurts, Tim. Really
You
hurts.
should get hold of a copy. I've got the second edition, and I've looked through it. And there's something very curious about that. When he's talking about the authorship of the Gospels, not once in the entire book, not in the footnotes, not in the text, not in the suggested readings, does he anywhere mention any single piece of the patristic evidence regarding the authorship of the Gospels. In what other philological field would it be considered fair to treat of the authorship as he does without even mentioning the unanimous testimony of the church fathers regarding the authorship of these books? That is, shall we say, very odd as an omission. I was really surprised by it. Now, I was using the second edition. So it's Oxford University Press, 2000. It is possible that in some subsequent edition, there was something included that wasn't in that. So I don't want to say that I know that in the most up-to-date edition it's not. That's the one I happened to pick up. That's the one I looked through, and I was astonished. So if you like, send me your address. I will go out, I will hunt down, I will find a copy of that, and I will mail it to you.
Yeah, because I really hate that's a $50 textbook that I
will, or I'll just send you my own copy if you want.
That's pretty
Bill,
generous.
I will take care of you. I'm not asking you to
Thank
go out and spend your own money on it. I'll take care of that. But you should look at it. It's really fascinating.
No, and you had some, to your credit, you had some excellent points on the patristic fathers, on that debate with Bart. And I appreciate, because these YouTubers, they never object to Bart. They never say, Bart, could you be wrong? Oh, no, of course. I'm sorry, it's black. So I agree with you on a lot of what you're saying.
Okay, who's got a Bible?
There's one behind John.
Let's pull it off.
I got it, Tim.
All right. Right. So
John 21.
John 20.
Verse 1.
Verse number 1.
Says,
That's the verse that Bart directs us to, and he says, was it Mary Magdalene alone? Mary alone, he says. And then he cites John 20, verse 1. Tell me what you see there. What does it say?
This is the NASB. It says, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb.
Right. So who's named there? Just Mary Magdalene. If I were to say to you on the strength of that verse alone, yeah, but it doesn't say that Mary was alone, you'd look at me with a raised eyebrow, right? You would say, okay, dude, I mean, you're kind of forcing it apologetically there. It's not strictly the case that it has to be Mary alone, but it sure looks like it. Isn't that what you would say? Right. Now read the next verse.
And so she ran and came to Simon, Peter, and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and they said to them, they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him.
And who doesn't know?
Second person plural.
We. Uk oidamen.
They said to him. That's
It's
the other
plural.
pronoun.
Right. Who are the we?
Women. You would
Well,
think.
it's somebody besides Mary Magdalene, right? Verse 1 names only her, and by that verse alone, which is the only verse that Bart points to, you could say, oh, it kind of sounds like she might be alone as far as I can tell, and it would look like forcing it to try to make the verse say anything else. I'm not claiming that verse 1 says there was anybody besides Mary.
So you don't think she was using the majestic we?
Kind of doubt it, right? So, I mean, this is you wanted a simple example. Here's a simple example, right? Yeah, you look at just that one verse, which is the only verse he cites, and you say, sounds like it's Mary alone. You go to the next verse, and Mary is indicating that there's been more people than just her who don't know where they've laid him. I call foul. That's not fair. You may say, it's a small detail. And it is. So you want more? I'll give you more.
Maybe one more.
All right, let's do another one. So,
If you need a scripture verse, I'll read it for you.
yeah, let's see. Now, you know what I'm going to do? Instead, I want to read you some secular history. This will be fun, because I could go on with these all day. Right, so let's do this. Who made the public proclamation of the Declaration of Independence from the balcony of the Old State House in Boston on the morning of the 18th of July, 1776. We have sources. We have contemporaneous sources that say, on the basis of eyewitness testimony, that it was William Greenleaf, High Sheriff of Suffolk County. We also have contemporary sources, just as close to the facts, who say it was Colonel Thomas Crafts. Spoiler alert, these are not the same person.
Okay, I get that. And you said this earlier when you were talking about Peter and Jesus and their dog walking across the water. And you said in other forms where you're where you're talking about history, I think you said Gettysburg Address and stuff like that. Okay, here's my thought about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Whoever was on that balcony, I think the one thing that we can probably agree on is they were human, just like me or you. Perhaps it was, they said Teresa, and it was this Teresa or that Teresa. We don't know. Okay. But you didn't say, and one of them took to wings and began to fly. And so now you have to decide, well, was it the person or was it the person flying?
Right.
So that's totally different than someone walking on water. You would have to take me to a body of water and show me somebody walking on water for me to buy that.
Right, so isn't this the Jesus Christ Superstar thing? Jesus Christ, if you're no fool, come walk across my swimming pool?
I'm not familiar with that, but whatever.
It was big back in the 80s.
I wasn't born.
We believe.
Oh, man.
But it's kind of like when Bill was talking about the zombies. And you said, well, they weren't these kind of zombies that were flesh-eating or whatever you said. So here's my question.
I am a walker, so I kind of resent that.
Well, I'm a shapeshifter, so. So let me ask this. One, do you believe that dead people got out of a grave and walked, went into town and did whatever? Do you believe?
Yes.
Okay. That kind of there's my line.
I understand.
Okay.
And I understand why it's your line.
Okay, so let me ask you this.
Right.
What if I'm a dead person and I actually came in today from the Arlington Memorial Cemetery? And is that the same kind of dead people that it was, drinking coffee? Was that the same kind of dead people?
I'm not sure what you mean by same kind.
I mean, was it a normal looking person that got out of the grave? I mean, were they embalmed?
So
were they?
All that Matthew says, and he says it very briefly, is that many of them came out of their graves and came into Jerusalem after the resurrection and were seen of many. And then that's it. He doesn't have any details that he vouchsafes to us. Did he himself see any of them? We can't tell, right? It sounds like he's reporting someone else's reports. But it does seem like if they looked just like any of us, they would have had to be people who were known to at least some of the people who were supposed to have seen them.
And maybe they had been married to people who got remarried in the meantime, and they didn't know what to do.
Right. Well, it would be deeply disturbing. Yes. Right.
The Christian assumption is that there was probably a resurrected body at that point, right?
Not necessarily, because we're just not given any details.
Speculation.
Right. All that we know is that they were apparently recognizable. Right. Now, a zombie with its flesh falling off would probably not have inspired those reports, and one of the Old Testament saints would not have been recognizable. Hi, I'm Elijah. Yeah. I've got 3 Elijahs who are cousins of mine. What do you want?
Well,
Here, what I'm hearing maybe is that it's one thing to say that there's a detail, could it be right or wrong, is it a contradiction or not? But when you introduce a miracle, it's very, very hard to believe. We don't see things happening. That's a whole different category of a discrepancy.
Well, if I
right?
had walked in here tonight and my father was here, who's been dead since 1980, I wouldn't be sitting here calmly listening to you. I would be going, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, kind of along the same line of the buying of miracles as a matter of belief.
Right.
I was watching a show, and the protagonist is an atheist. He's a detective. He's autistic, and he's a savant. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, the ME is a Christian, and he was grilling him about, well, why don't you believe or whatever? And the guy said, and it was just so beautifully said, he said, there are 4,000 different gods and religions in this world. I don't believe in any of them. You don't believe in 3,999 of them.
Sure, it's a variant on one of Richard Dawkins' lines. Right.
Okay, well, gosh, I did not know
It's
that.
a mantra.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's kind of like that. Every other religion that you're going to look at is going to have dead people, returning to life, or people turning.
Well, like
blind
Apollonius
into-
of Tiana had resurrected people.
Yeah.
He did
So
miracles.
that would be the other thing. Why is
It's called special pleading.
okay? So
Is it not?
why is this? Why is it believable
Right.
in this particular religion
Right.
and not in another?
I think that's a perfectly fair question, and it was in fact the question I anticipated and answered in the opening speech of my debate with Zach Moore when he and I at the Bible and Beer Consortium debated the question, could it ever be rational to believe in a reported miracle? And the answer that I gave there is that we should apply some filters even before we begin to look into these things, because there are thousands of reported miracles across a wide variety of religions. In Hinduism alone, there are a whole bunch of claims that crop up, and it's very difficult even to find two Hindus who actually believe quite the same things. It's quite a variegated religion, but there are many, many miracle claims. So here are some criteria that are topic neutral and religion neutral. None of them make reference to any particular religion, and they're, I think, transparently reasonable, all right? Criterion number one, there is some reason to doubt a reported miracle when the first report that we have of it is a report that we find only long after the events are supposed to have taken place. Bill just mentioned Apollonius of Tiana, right? Philostratus' life of Apollonius is written well over a century after the death of the historical Apollonius, appeals to a source which nobody's been able to find, was written under the auspices of Julia Domna, who was looking for something that could serve as a parallel to the Christian miracle claims, and in fact, in many cases, parallels claims out of the Gospels and Acts, right? Do fetters fall off of Peter's hands? Well, Apollonius shakes fetters off of his hands as well, and so on. So that happens. We get this report not in the earlier accounts of Apollonius, and we do have a few, but they're bereft of these claims, so we find them only long after the events. That does not mean that they must be false. They could still be true, for all that, but it gives us a reason that is not a reason that's baked into some particular religious view to doubt it. We may reasonably doubt a reported miracle when it is first reported as having taken place only at a great distance away from the place where it is reported. Because then it's very hard to go and check up on it. And so it's easy to see how a rumor like that could flourish unchecked. Over in India there was this thing, says somebody who's sitting in Rome talking about it. Yeah, who knows what happens out there? That's far, far away. There's reason to doubt a reported miracle when it might have been allowed to pass without critical examination on the occasion and in the context in which it occurred. So many of the reported miracles of the Middle Ages of ecclesiastical history were done in support of, say, the Catholics against the Protestants, or some particular church against some other particular church, and party feeling being what it is. I mean, golly, we don't even have to be in religious context. We can just go to political context to see how strong party feeling can be and how it can induce people not to look critically at something. So there is another case where we have a reason to doubt whether the report is true. Now, none of these reasons by itself, and not even all three of them together, are an absolute guarantee that the thing didn't happen. But if you're looking for a place to start in your investigation of putative miracle claims, it would be ideal to start somewhere where we didn't have any of those factors, neither the space, nor the time, nor the willingness to be inattentive. And these are all criteria that are discussed by John Douglas in his book, The Criterion, which is specifically designed as a response to David Hume, and is designed to give us kind of a filter through which to push these things. Now, if you do that, you will find that you have just eliminated very nearly all of the miracle claims in religions in recorded history. But with the resurrection, this is not true. And you can even find this in somebody like the Roman historian Tacitus in his Annals, Book 15, Chapter 44, where he says that after the founder of this religion suffered the extreme penalty under Pilate, the mischievous superstition broke out again, not only in Jerusalem, so he tells you where it began, but it spread even all the way to Rome, sort of a cesspool where all kinds of delusions collect. But he picks out the fact that this took its rise in Jerusalem. That's in the face of a hostile audience. He places the time of it at the time of Pilate, so he's got it at the same time period. It's not far, far away, right? It was proclaimed in the very place where it was purported to have done. So, rightly or wrongly, the Christians have an example at hand for which there is not a parallel in other religious traditions. You can still say, if you want to, and you probably do want to, you know what, that's great, I'm still skeptical. But when you say, why should you put your trust in this one rather than in that one, I can immediately say, well, I'll tell you something. A whole bunch of these just go to the wall with those three simple criteria, and this one does not. You can still say, I don't believe in anything non-natural, and we can have a conversation about that. We can talk about Hume's critique of reported miracles. But I do want to come back. I want to circle back and just make one critical point here, and then I'll let you have the floor and you can say anything more that you want to. That question, which is its own reasonable question, and I acknowledge that, is a different question from the question, should we discount the gospel accounts because there are variegations in what they're reporting, because they seem not to be entirely consistent with one another? That point is the point that I'm using these examples to contest. It does not answer your question, and I don't want to pretend that it does. So to that extent, I agree with you. You've got a concern, and what I'm saying right now doesn't address it. But your concern isn't the only concern people bring up. They want to know, well, but in the face of so many contradictions, how could you even take these things seriously? Dale Allison is very fond of saying, after the writing of David Friedrich Strauss, this whole question should have just been settled. This is Strauss's Life of Jesus, right? This is a book out of the 1830s, so he doesn't mind going back in history to an older source like that. And Strauss is big on the kind of nitpicking, oh, let's see, there's an argument from silence here, and there's a discrepancy there, and he's just incredibly ingenious at forging these things. So all I'm trying to do with these examples is to say that kind of argument by itself does not distinguish the Gospels from other reportage, even in secular history. What you're bringing up does, and I agree that it's a separate point, but that's not what I'm trying to do with these considerations. Is that fair?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
But what me and Kim were talking about, here's a major problem. Matthew has him up, this is the resurrection of Jesus, a central point, has him appear in Galilee, 100 miles away. Acts and Luke have him appear in Jerusalem. Only.
And exclusively.
So you got...
Only yes, exclusively no.
He told the disciples not to leave Jerusalem. They were only in the outskirts of Jerusalem, Bethany as far as they got. And Jesus explicitly forbade them from leaving Jerusalem until Pentecost was to come, which was the time of Jesus after Jesus.
Right. But we've demonstrated that in the book club before. And if you just go through the Gospels and you read the accounts, and you follow the timeline, that there's not a contradiction at all.
Well, let me just start by saying that anybody can come up with a semi-plausible way around any apparent contradiction, right? Let's just get that on the table.
Sure.
And that's a point. It's a very important point that can't be overlooked. Okay, so any religion, if you look at Mormonism or Islam or whatever, there's going to be problems, right? But they have their people and their ways to figure out ways around whatever contradictions that you could throw at them. And so it doesn't impress me that you could come up with some way around the apparent contradiction that Luke says stay in Jerusalem and don't leave Jerusalem until the resurrection. But you look at Luke, read Luke, and you try to find any way that you can get out of the fact that Jesus told them to stay in Jerusalem. His first appearance was in Jerusalem, or in the environs of Jerusalem.
Sure.
So they never had an opportunity to get over to Galilee. Yeah, you can maybe find some verse in between these two verses. Maybe this could have happened or whatever. That doesn't convince me. That's just sloppy. That's
well, the problem though is that it's not going to try to. I'm sorry, that messes with my head. Is there's like a 30-second delay? The problem is this isn't just some way to go around it. If you just read the Gospels,
read Luke. See if what I'm saying is
true.
I
have. And the problem is that
find me a place in Luke where Jesus allows the disciples to go all the way to Galilee.
Well, you have it within that account. You have them saying that there's an indefinite amount of time between these two verses. You're acting like verse 23 and then 24 is on the same day. That you and I both know that doesn't always happen. And so what happens is as you read through, you choose to read through Luke as if everything's happening on the same day, when in reality, if you look at the passage, and some places they say 8 days later.
But he says, "Do not leave Jerusalem until the Spirit comes from on high." That's talking about Pentecost.
Yeah, and he doesn't say that till he's come back from Galilee.
No, there is no mention of Galilee in Luke.
That is exactly right. There's no mention of Galilee in Luke.
And the very first appearance was in Jerusalem in Luke. Mm-hmm. I'm just reading Luke for what Luke says. I want to know what Luke thinks. I don't want to know what Matthew thinks. I want to know what Luke thinks. And Luke doesn't. In fact, he changes what Mark says. Mark has Jesus preaching to the disciples, talking about going to Galilee, and then. And in Luke, the very same verse, in the same context, he turns the words to say, "Do you not remember while I was in Galilee?" He knows the word Galilee is in there, but he's twisting it to make the whole story different, so that he can keep all the action in Jerusalem. I don't know why he wants to keep all the action in Jerusalem, but Luke is going out of his way to keep all the action in Jerusalem. Okay. So you can try to protest and stomp your feet and say, "Well, in between these two verses, there could have been something," but I'm trying to take Luke for what he's trying to say. Luke is trying to say everything happened in Jerusalem.
So I'm going to go this far when you can. If all that we had were Luke 24, that is the impression I think that we would be left.
Exactly. I'm glad.
Right, and so I'm going to grant you that. But now I want to do something with Luke 24 and Acts 1. All right? So let's look at Luke 24 here,
40 days.
Beginning in 46. Now I have something very specific in mind. Let's begin here at verse 46, and let's go through 49, right? Then he said to them, "Thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day, and that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of these things. Behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with power from on high." Is that the verse that you had in mind in Luke 24? Is that the one?
I think there's at least one place where he does tell that it's right at the first appearance.
The first appearance is on the road to Emmaus.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, foolish and slow of heart to believe.
Right. We don't know exactly who that was.
Right. Yeah, Clopas and somebody. Yeah. Right. But this is the only place throughout here that I am seeing that there's any statement of Jesus that mentions Jerusalem. They mention that the two on the road rose up at that very hour and returned to Jerusalem. So there's a mention of Jerusalem there. But that's not what you're talking about. There's this one verse here, verse 49, 24:49, that I can see where he says, "But tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with power from on high." And that's the only one I can find. Do you have another one? Because I don't want to move on to what I'm about to do. And if you've got something else, I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying.
No, I mean, I just remember, it's been a while since I've looked at it. But,
that's the gist of it. Yeah.
But you can see that everything seems to be happening within that same...
He certainly narrates it in this linear fashion.
Right, it seems to be happening within that same day.
So what happens if we go over to the book of Acts, which I think is manifestly written by the same person, right? And here's what we get, starting at verse 6. "Therefore, when they had come together, they asked him, saying, 'Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?' And he said to them, 'It is not for you to know the times or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority, but you shall receive power, and the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria.'" So that's this. There's that reference. "And when he had spoken these things, while they watched, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight." I don't really see any tension in saying that the occasion on which Jesus is saying these things to them is the same occasion on which we've got verse 49 in Luke 24. But in Acts 1, he's not writing at the end of a roughly scroll-length document. He's not plausibly being subject to any limitations. The end of Luke is compressed. The end of Matthew is even more compressed. The end of Matthew is just like, oh my gosh, you're doing this gallop across a whole bunch of things. The final chapter of Matthew is incredibly compressed. But I think that there's reason as you look at it. I'm not talking about the 40 days thing. That's its own thing and interesting, which he doesn't say at the end of, Luke volume 1, with Acts being Luke volume 2. But I see the context here as being very similar to the context of that verse in Luke 24. And that is a reason, not simply as saying, well, I could artificially draw a line in here, and if I did, it would save my belief. And this is an old argument. People have been having this argument, of course, since at least the 19th century, when skepticism about these things really took off. But I grant to you that in several of these cases, if all we had was one of the documents, our most natural reading would be one thing. But in all of history, secular history included, we look at these things and we say, okay, we have multiple documents, and there seem to be some cases where a prima facie reading of one would be contradicted by what we see in another one. Can we reconcile them? Harmonization is not something that's invented by ardent fundamentalists to save their faith. It's a historical procedure that we use all the time. And that's where I'd like to come back to this question about the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, one thing that might help is look at Acts 1, 3, and 4 taken together. It says, after his suffering, Jesus' suffering, of course, he presented himself to them and gave him many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God. On one occasion, while he was eating with them, he gave them this command: do not leave Jerusalem, but wait till the gift.
On one occasion. Nice. That's even better than what I was reading. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So taking those two together, there is possibilities.
Yeah, I don't think that doesn't count as inventing it out of whole cloth. On one occasion, he said to them, okay, good. Thank you for that.
Over that period of 40 days, somehow.
Somewhere in there. No, he doesn't say, and it wasn't the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
But he doesn't say that it was. It's just on one occasion he said to them.
Yeah.
So what's the Declaration of Independence?
Let's do it.
Let's get back to that.
So, is it William Greenleaf or is it Colonel Thomas Crafts? Well, I mean, it seems like it can't be both, right? And yet, it was. So we have one more source. Only one. But that source tells us Greenleaf was the person who should, by office, have read it. But whether congenitally or just on that day, he had a weak voice, and he couldn't make himself heard to the crowd below. So he read a sentence, and then Crafts, who apparently had a stentorian voice, repeated it loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then Greenleaf would read another sentence, and Crafts would do that one. And this is how they got through the Declaration of Independence. Now, I put it to you that if this had been a religious matter and some religious advocate had brought up this as a reconciliation of those two pieces of testimony, we would, all of us, be saying, oh, wow, you know what, you can, if you're imaginative enough, come up with a way of reconciling anything. But this isn't a religious matter, and this is the way it actually went down. Truth is sometimes stranger than the fictions we would invent. It's just very, very odd. Let me give you another one. This is from 1927, right? So we're almost 100 years out from it. Calvin Coolidge was a famously taciturn president. He just didn't say much. One day in 1927, he notified the various newspapers that he would make an announcement. So the newspapers all sent reporters. These are trained observers to his office, and they filed through the office. He didn't say a word to anybody. He handed each one of them a slip of paper that had a typewritten statement on it, same statement to every one of them. And then they filed out, and they immediately went and wrote up their reports, right? So, identical slips of paper, same room, filing through at the same time. Here are some of the reports that we had that were collected by the New York Telegram on August 4th of 1927. One report. He sat looking up at them. Another report, he was standing at his mahogany desk. Sitting or standing? I mean, is this a VeggieTales joke? This is sitting, this is standing. Again, just a trace of a smile lighting up his face, says one of them. Another one says, he did not smile. Another one says, with a trace of a smile about his lips. Another one says, very serious and grim. Well, which way was it? Oh, wow. Smoking a cigar, says one of the reporters. His long cigar holder in his hand, but not mentioning the smoking. Well, which way is it? Now, these are trained observers who are going through in a span of about 1 minute, collecting the same thing from the same guy in the same room, and their reports are this varied. All of them report that the message was he did not choose to stand for re-election, probably due to the untimely death of his son shortly before that. But we have all this variation, and yet, in secular history, we just shrug and we say, you know what? Don't know how they came to have these. Maybe he was puffing on his cigar when they first walked in and then he just held it in his hand. Maybe he was sitting down when they first filed through and he stood up later. Maybe he was standing and sat down, but I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe somebody just got it wrong. But the take-home message, the headline, remains the same. President Coolidge announces he will not stand for re-election. I can go on and on. I can talk to you about the death of the Emperor Caracalla in the 200s. I can talk about the death of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. We've got wild variations of these kinds that exceed the level of variation that we find in the Gospels. My point is not to say that that proves that the reports in the Gospels are true. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is variations even of this extent in historical testimony of people who are not careless and are right there on the scene do not prove that the events didn't happen in much the way they are described. They may prove that the reporters are not inerrant or that the sources we have are not inerrant. That is not my business here. I'm not interested in the question of inerrancy. Incidentally, and about that debate with Bart Ehrman, 30 seconds before we went on the air, I said to Bart, now, we're here to debate the reliability, and I just want to make it plain that, as far as I'm concerned, that's not the same question as the question of inerrancy, and I really am not interested in discussing that. And he's like, yeah, okay, I get that. And then for the first 20 minutes, what does he do? If you've heard the debate, it's like all about inerrancy. And I'm just sitting there thinking, well, at least this gives a time for the caffeine to get into my bloodstream. Because I was shivering in the cold in my office at about 7 in the morning, and Bart was over in England at about noon after a nice lunch, and he was in studio, and I was... Did I mention I was shivering in my office? By the way, we actually have winter in Michigan. You guys, did you think it was cold yesterday? Because I was walking around in my shirt sleeves going, what? I don't get this. What's wrong with you guys?
You're welcome.
Last month I'd asked, it was just a question, literally it was just a question, it was an argument, but I had asked Justin Bass how to talk to Bart, because I've never talked to Bart, so what do I do if I ask him a question, what should I be prepared for? I asked him what he thought was the best explanation for why we have the New Testament if the resurrection actually didn't happen. And it was, Daniel, I don't understand your logic. I mean, right off the bat, just from the question itself. So you're talking earlier about his sophistication and level of debate and whether he turns to rhetoric. But I think the answer we finally got out of him was it was a vision and they were mistaken. That seems to be his
right
criteria. How do you?
Well, let me just say, but what he responded, and maybe he did misunderstand you, but he responded was a lot of religions have miracle stories, but just because it's in a book doesn't mean it happened.
Right.
You believe the Quran, you believe the Book of Mormon. He wasn't saying that because it's in the Bible, how do you explain if it's not true?
Yeah, I was not.
What he was saying was, how do you explain the phenomena of Christianity if the resurrection didn't happen? And there's great atheist answers to that. I mean, we're not saying there's not, but he didn't really seem to understand the question.
Yeah, it wasn't like, well, the Bible says it's true, so it must be true, therefore why are you wrong about this? Rather, what do you think is the best historical explanation for why we even have it in the first place?
Right.
I asked him a similar question after that debate with Dr. Bass. I talked to him for about 10 minutes after that debate because he agreed with the points Dr. Bass made, which was the synoptics implicitly portray Jesus as divine, John explicitly portrays Jesus as divine. So I asked him, I was like, Dr. Ehrman, why do you think the earliest Christians and the gospel writers portray Jesus as divine if you don't think the historical Jesus actually made that claim? And he told me the same thing. He said visions. Really quickly, he said visions. And I was like, well, who had the visions? He said, well, probably Peter, Paul, and Mary. He said probably at least one. He told me that directly.
Wow. Sounds like a singing group to me.
So so when did you ask him your question? Was that
last month? Last month.
So
But it turned
so it's the same reason.
It made me look terrible
Well,
because I wouldn't
I
chase his
think
argument.
what I understood is to you to be asking was, couldn't the fact that the resurrection happened be an explanation for,
Yeah, I did ask that.
for why the New Testament got written?
I
in
did
the
ask
first
that.
place?
Is that in his historical?
He was
continuum?
reading. He was taking that. He was reading between the lines and thinking you were making an argument that said that, the reason that the New Testament was written was because something really did happen to provoke that.
Yeah, I just had two questions. One was, do you think the resurrection is a plausible explanation for why we have the New Testament? And two, if not the resurrection, what is your best plausible historical?
Right.
That's all I was doing. And as a moderator, I just asked questions. It was not a veiled argument, but wow, I got my head cut off.
I thought he was unfair.
And if you're skeptical of my memory on this, I have a picture on my Facebook I posted with him, and I wrote a little summary of what he said to me the day it happened.
But clearly you're just confabulating all of this, and probably Bart doesn't exist.
Well, we did talk about
But it all
Tim.
happened on the same day between you and I. It happened Monday. It happened to me, and then Tuesday it happened to you.
And Jim, we did have a thing where we talked about kind of on the mythicism. We had a book club where we talked about this idea that because there are parallels in other religions or even in the Old Testament, you can find all these parallels. Did that mean that it was a myth that was built out of those earlier stories? And we did the parallels between the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, even I began to wonder, did this really happen? Because even the names were the same in some cases. And it's just like, obviously they borrowed from this earlier story to make up this thing, had I not lived through John F. Kennedy's assassination
We can
myself.
do the same thing with the sinking of the Titanic and a novel that was written a few years prior.
The Titan.
Right, like the Titan. Oh my gosh!
Titanic, Titan.
Well, clearly, here's another one for you. The fiery preacher Savonarola in 1496, already on the outs with his own church, preached a series of prophetic sermons saying that armies would march on Rome and sack it, and that they would stable their horses in the churches of Rome, and he's ticked off. And they printed these sermons, and we've got them with like the printed dates on them. And in 1497, he was burned at the stake. And a generation later, in 1527, armies actually marched on Rome and sacked it and stabled their horses in the churches. Now, at the time that he was writing this, there were no Protestants. There was no non-Catholic group that might so desecrate churches by their behavior. And it's just a really odd thing that this comes up. Honestly, his descriptions of the sack of Rome are more specifically tied in with what we independently know about the actual subsequent sack of Rome than Jesus' Olivet Discourse is about what we know about the sack of Jerusalem. It's really uncanny, and yet this is just secular history. Now, I am not asking anyone to say that Savonarola was an actual prophet. That's not the claim that I'm trying to make. What I am trying to say is, it is not reasonable to doubt that he said these things at the time simply because there is a rather dramatic correspondence between what he said and what subsequently took place. The timeline is indisputable with Savonarola. We can't deny it. strange things happen in history. And if we were writing them, our editors would probably send those chapters back and say, I'm sorry, but you're kind of over the top with your fiction here. I think you should probably tone it down a little bit. But there it is. That's not a matter of religion, except insofar as he was ticked off with the Roman Catholic leadership at the time. But it is an indisputable matter of historical fact. He did predict this, and it did happen very much the way that he portrayed it. So we need to be careful. I think that it's fair and right to say that we should require more evidence for a miraculous claim than for a mundane claim. I think that's correct. I think if we don't say that, we are setting ourselves up to be chumps. And being a chump is a bad thing. And we all know people who seem vulnerable to that in one way or another. I mean, let's be honest, right? We could go outside of religion. We could even go outside of politics and just talk about people who are deep into some form of alternative medicine that you don't yourself endorse, and you probably just go, oh, wow, how can somebody who's educated and otherwise intelligent go into that? Why don't they do essential oils instead? Or something, maybe you guys but honestly, I mean, there's only so many times I can be told, but lavender and lemon essential oils really do protect you against COVID. And I'm just like, what do you even say? So people do sometimes do stupid things, but nobody sets out wanting to be a stupid person. That's not something that we set out wanting to do. And rightly or wrongly, the Christians believe in the resurrection of Jesus because they believe, at least those of us who are not presuppositionalists, so I exclude my misguided presuppositionalist brethren, but believe it because they think they have evidence for it. You can say, yeah, but you know what? I'm not persuaded by your evidence. I don't think you're right. But they do think it because they think they have evidence for it. They're attempting to be responsive to evidence. I had one of my research assistants was wondering about this, so he asked his grandmother, Grandmother, would you say that you believe in Christianity without evidence? And she said, no, I have reasons. And then she gave him her reasons. Now, you might not have thought that her reasons were good enough to underwrite serious belief. You might not have thought that her reasons were as good as the reasons that William Lane Craig could have given. But she did not view herself as believing this without a basis of reason. So I think a club like this is a good place for us to have these vigorous discussions. And I hope that one of the things that those of you who are my atheist friends come away with is at least this much. The Christians think that they are being responsive to evidence. You may disagree, and that's why we have these discussions, which I think is super healthy. But they don't want you to just take it by faith. We could probably go out there and find people who want to say that, but a large number of us aren't saying that, aren't asking you to say that. We want to be responsive to the evidence that we have. And so I think that that's why it's great that we can come and we can hammer on each other in good ways. I don't mind a bit when Bill gets animated. I think it's awesome. Do it, dude. You've been through the ringer on this, right? You've gone through a heart-wrenching experience. I'm deadly serious. This is not a bloodless thing for you, right? So go ahead and be passionate. I love it. Be that way. And then let me be passionate right back to you. Because if there is any hope that we are going to find out if we are wrong, then we need to be willing to be passionate and embrace each other at the end of it.
I don't have a problem with you. What the problem I have is with these hip churches, which the church I go to.
Yes. That may be more of a product of your age.
$10 million redoing their church so they can sit on their sofas and their iPads and be cool hip Christians. But anyway, let me...
if you'd like the name of somebody who runs an orphanage in Uganda, who could really use $10 as opposed to $10 million, I will tell you where to find him. And he's doing good work by any standard. Yes, he's a Christian, but he's also keeping kids off the streets in an environment where being on the streets is a not
Tim,
good
believe
thing.
it or not, our time is running out quickly.
But I would
So,
just like to push back, if I could. I've been waiting to say
do it. Do
Well,
it. Ken.
here's what we're going to do. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to let Ken push back gently. Okay.
Well, it's supposed to be passionate, right? We're going to push back passionate.
Has a question, and then we're going to end up with Brady. I think has a. Do you have a question too? And then, but I asked Tim if he'd be so kind as not to rush right out the door after we conclude, so we can have a little more conversation.
We'll play
Go
chess.
ahead.
So I felt like I was being a little bit gaslit on this Luke 24.
Yeah.
So I just now read through it a little bit.
Did you
more
find
again.
another place?
Well, it's a matter of reading through looking at the time cues that are being presented. You had the appearance to the two at the road to Emmaus. That was on the day of the resurrection. That was
I agree.
Easter Sunday.
I do agree.
And everything following that, there was, and immediately they did this. They went here. They did this. He appeared to them there. And then after he said that, then he said this, and then all that leads up to don't leave Jerusalem before Pentecost. And so I just find maybe you can find some verse in there that could at a stretch be where you could insert 40 days or whatever, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not, and you might be convinced, but you have to convince me.
Right,
You understand
yeah.
this? Okay, I have to look and understand, well, what is most plausible here? And what is most plausible to me is Luke is telling a story where he's telling them at the very day of the resurrection to stay in Jerusalem. And so, I'm sorry, but you can't settle for convincing yourself. You have to convince me that it's more plausible that he said this 40 days later than he said that the very day of the resurrection.
Right. So let me ask you a question, Ken, because
Yeah.
you're a former translator who cared
and
about these things, right?
Let me add this. I think atheists or non-believers do a disservice by focusing on how many people appeared in the tomb and yada, 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 all these little minuscule things. This is the central story of Christianity. Who did Jesus appear to, and where did he appear first? Was it in one end of Palestine in the north side, or was it in the south side? That it's like if a witness to a murder said, "Oh, well, it happened in L.A.," and then somebody else says, "No, it happened in New York." Well, what's going on here?
Well, yeah, if there's a police investigation, they'd be all over those.
Yeah. This is the central. This is not a small thing to sweep.
Christianity says, just shut up and believe it.
It's not a detail that says, I'm so tired.
Oh, you don't know the church I go to.
I'm so tired of hearing, well, all the,
Sounds like
there's small differences in details, and that just
they all
shows
kick me out.
that they're coming from different perspectives, and they're all, if they were all in sync, then you wouldn't trust it. Well, no, this is a huge discrepancy. This is fundamental. This is fatal, in my view.
Right.
And this is one of the things that led me away from Christianity.
I understand. And I am not going to make light of that.
Mm-hmm.
You tried to make your best assessment, and you did it with something that was not easy to give up, like Bill. And I appreciate the integrity of anyone who is moved to put aside something that has been a big part of your life and to say, you know what, this hurts, but I can't do it. So I'm not in the slightest going to minimize that. What I do want to point out, though, is that, and you know this because you know Greek, there's a difference between what we do in our translations, which are often to some extent and in some measure interpretive, and what it says. So in Luke 24:46, then he said to them, thus it is written, etc., right? What's the Greek word that we're rendering as then? You can look it up.
Kai, probably.
It's just Kai, right?
And I don't know Greek, by the way, so.
Okay, all right.
I'll be happy to take credit. If
Kai.
I know a little bit.
It's Kai,
a little bit, but it's way past. It's in my old life. It's
okay, fair enough. Kai is not a term of chronological sequence. It's just a coordinating conjunction. It's not even contrastive.
I mean,
we can render it,
yeah.
and also we could render it. Sometimes it has that meaning.
Yeah.
Right.
I've heard these explanations, so this is not something.
I
new
understand.
To me. I'm just telling you that I see the sweep of this narrative, and I see I see how Galilee got twisted a little bit. And if you look at the two parallel places where Jesus is said to have said Galilee, in Luke, if you compare what he's saying in Mark, it's like he's trying to make it. He's trying to twist it to make it so that the appearance could not be in
I understand that that's your interpretation, and I would like to
But it
interact
tells
with
a
you.
story. It tells a
I'd like to
story.
interact more with you about that as to
Yeah.
whether that's the best interpretation. Can we swap email addresses and then correspond some about this? I'm very open to doing that, and I don't want to give you some kind of facile 20-second answer and then move on. So let's do that, and let's dig into that one. You tell me what the two passages are. We'll dig into them, and we'll exchange some emails about that. I would love to do that, because it's a question that sounds to me like it's a fair question arising from a fair-minded attempt to put it all together. I get that.
I agree with Tim. When you tell the story, it's just like it does parallel me with my Mormonism experience, and it's something that I didn't want to or look for, but I felt like I was forced to it. And you don't do that flippantly because you glanced at a couple of verses in the Book of Mormon or something. So when you say stuff like that, Ken, it's like, man, this guy's just like me. That's what I feel like.
Oh, it was horrendous. I mean, this is just one passage. It was one of the big ones for me, but it's the weight of all of them added together, and also the knowledge. And I live in Africa, and in Islam was in an Islamic region. You have smart people that believe things that we find ridiculous, but they're educated people just like you are. I mean, they're just as smart as you. You're smarter than me, I'll give you that. But you would beat me at chess,
Yeah,
maybe.
But, pretty certainly.
So
you play the whole room.
So I'm willing to grant that. I just see in every tradition there's people that are very smart, at the top of their game, who think the arguments that they have for their own religion and the apologetics, the arguments that they have to deflect from the outsiders who are attacking them, they really believe those arguments. They just like you do, right? I mean, there's Islamic scholars that are tremendously smart.
Could you say the same about atheists?
Yeah, exactly. So in every tradition or every whatever it is, and I just find it's a little bit discouraging just to know that confidence isn't enough. Or a commitment to believing something is not enough. We can be fundamentally mistaken and think we're completely faithful to what the text is really saying or what the reality really is.
And at the end of the day,
I just don't find some of these arguments convincing.
I understand.
These
and I would say, in parallel to that, I would say, I don't find some of the objections convincing, and you and I are going to stare at one another. You don't.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So to that extent, there is a certain parallel there. Yeah. And at the end of the day, any one of us can only do our best to be faithful to the evidence as far as we can. But one thing we can do is don't just hole up in your echo chamber and listen only to the people who agree with you. And that is why we are here tonight. And that's why I really appreciate the fact that you guys come out and Terry and Ken and Bill, you guys are like passionately pushing. Because I need to be reminded, not just reminded in an abstract way, but be reminded by faces of people in front of me. You know what? There are smart people who just don't see it your way. And I hope that whatever you think of whether I'm smart, you at least realize that we're sincerely trying to get it right. And
I like not trying to win the argument, because there's times you can do things to try to win an argument. But really, genuinely, I sense in this room that there's an attempt to understand the other person and to get to the truth. And we all are I am so much more aware of my confirmation bias when I listen to you guys. And not that I can necessarily ever overcome it, but that's the first line of defense, is being aware of it. So let me get to Bo first real quick.
Yeah, I heard this from both the atheists in the room and then somewhat from the Christians, was that there's 4,000 faiths. Why they can't all be right? But why can't the miracles performed by all 4,000 be from the same deity? If the Christian God is the ultimate God, or if there is a monotheistic entity that exists, couldn't it have given miracles to everyone?
So the standard response actually goes back to part 2 of David Hume's essay of miracles, and that
certainly you're familiar with that.
No, it is. Look, I mean, there's a direct line from Hume to Strauss and a direct line from Strauss to Allison.
This is your first book club. We've had whole book clubs on that, but this is your first book club.
Yeah. So Hume says, basically, look, they're all claiming that they have miracles that are in support of their traditions as opposed to all the others, right? And it's a fairly schizophrenic God who works miracles arbitrarily to people who promote X and to people who promote not X, putting them on, evidentially speaking, something of a similar playing field. That's weird. Not sure what kind of deity would do that. Maybe a high-level AI who wants to just jack with us and do some experiments on the human population. Sorry, Bo, had to do that just for you. But, look, that would be a very odd hypothesis given the diversity of things claimed to have been substantiated. People who give incompatible messages in multiple striking ways being given some kind of credential of authentication, apparently, by the same one and only deity. So Hume's objection is that he thinks there's nothing to choose among the different reports and they all sort of cross-cancel. I don't actually buy that there's nothing to choose among them, but if he were right, I think he would have a point. Does that help? Is that at least an answer to your question?
It is an answer.
An answer. It may not be the answer, but it's an answer.
Somebody else over here?
It was me. So, Ken, first of all, thank you for your question. And when you're looking, I've never seen what you were pointing out there, from the road to Emmaus to the last chapter, or the last verse. But it also occurs to me that earlier you were fighting pretty hard against an argument from silence, and this sounds like a sophisticated argument from silence. Why did you not say this? Now, it's sophisticated because you're looking at and then and then and then, suggesting that we have a narrative that is pointing from event to event to event toward until we get to the last event. But I was just thinking about this. If anyone here was going to really do some research on, say, Benjamin Franklin, you're not just going to look at one book about Benjamin Franklin. You're going to take every book seriously, like you're taking Luke seriously. But you're going to look at a lot of books about Benjamin Franklin and then form your understanding of who he was and what he did. And if you did that, you would also look at the other Gospels. And I think if you do that and you're as charitable with them as you would be with Benjamin Franklin, I think you would come to a conclusion and go, well, maybe this is not actually a contradiction that I can sort of stake my faith on one way or another. And the last thing I would say before I can see you want to come back, last thing I would say is this. I think for all of us, the reason that, we can look at all these secular works of history or secular works or even, things that are outside of our realm of reasonability, like Islam or, for some of you, Mormonism or whatever it is. And when you look at that and go, well, that doesn't really impact me, so I can be a little more objective about it. But if you're looking at Christianity, you're looking at it and going, if I accept this, it requires a lot from me. In fact, it may require everything.
Like going to Africa?
Well, yeah. As opposed to if you're just looking at, Marco Polo leaving out the Great Wall.
Yeah, if you rejected it, it can have a lot of impact in your life as well. If you've already accepted it and then you reject it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I'm just saying,
yeah.
That's why for everybody in this room, we take this a lot more seriously and we're willing to nitpick the heck out of things because my commitment to Benjamin Franklin or my commitment to the Great Wall of China is not near as big as my commitment will be if I accept Luke to be giving me the truth. And so I don't actually even object to you being maybe less charitable than you would to some of the secular authors. I just think it's helpful for all of us to think about that because this works into our bias. This is one of the reasons we have the biases we have.
That's right.
For you and for me, by the way. If all of a sudden I look at Luke and go, this doesn't make sense, well, then I have the same problem you had when you walked away from Christianity.
Well, our time is actually completely up. So on our last question, I'm gonna let the final word come from Brady, but I'm gonna have to limit the answer to either true or false. just kidding. Okay. So Tim, last month when we had Bart, he was talking about some of the places where you said, "Well, I believe this is certain % true." And then his question was, and I think Bart. Yeah, this is Bart asking the question. I'm asking and I'm channeling Bart right now. How do you say that something in history is any percentage true?
Do I?
I don't know. He said you did, but
you shouldn't believe everything you hear.
I'm just repeating his.
In the Blackwell Companion, Lydia and I make a case and calculate a base factor, but that base factor is not what we call a posterior probability. It is not a probability that this event is true, given all this evidence. It's a ratio of the probability of this evidence on the supposition that this is true to the probability on the supposition that it's false. We don't even put exact probability numbers in. We take Bayes factors, intelligence multipliers, as Jack Good called them at Bletchley Park when they used the exact same methodology in World War II to crack German ciphers.
That's clear enough.
You completely lost me on that.
Yeah. So the short answer is false is the short answer. But the longer answer is that this is a misconception about what we're doing, and you can use the structures of probable inference without having to put exact numbers on things. And you can still go places with that, and it matters. It's not a trivial exercise, it's not a dry run. And you can sometimes estimate the ratios of two numbers better than you can estimate the numbers individually. And I can give you examples.
So you weren't giving the probability that something was true or false.
Correct.
What you were doing was
getting expectations, ratios of strengths of expectations of things.
When you say ratio, do you mean a number?
When I say a ratio, I mean a number, but that number is not necessarily a probability. For one thing, the ratio could exceed 1 and a probability can't. So it's different from that, and you don't have to have the probabilities. I give examples of this in a paper I wrote for British Journal for the Philosophy of Science back in 2003, I think, in a purely secular context, and I'd be happy to show you examples of that kind. You can use the mathematics without putting statistical evaluations on propositions, and that's something I think Bart just doesn't appreciate.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, again, thank you for being part of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. If you're not if you are not on the email list, if you'll please email and let me know that my email is jwalker@watchman.org, and I'll put you on the list so you get notified of when the book club's coming up and who the guest author is.